Hi, I'm Naomi, and this is the story of how I found out my parents faked my death to claim something that was never meant to be theirs. They told the court I was gone, erased me from legal records, and tried to bury me with silence. But what hurt most wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how easy it had become for them to forget I ever existed. Before you hear the rest of the story, tell me, have you ever felt like your absence made things easier for everyone else? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a family drama you don't want to miss. They declared me dead. But last week, I got a letter addressed to Naomi Bell. The envelope was thick, official-looking, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a coupon from the local diner. I stared at the return address, Lancaster County Courthouse. The name printed in bold stopped my breath cold. Naomi Bell. My name. My real name. After all these years, I hadn't expected to see it again. Not legally, not in daylight, and certainly not in my mailbox. I set the letter on the counter beside the coffee pot, careful not to touch it too long like it might burn. Outside, Mrs. Wallace was sweeping leaves off the porch of the boarding house, her radio murmuring something cheerful about pumpkin pie orders. The morning sun poured through the window in that weak, golden way only November light can, the kind that makes even old tile look warm. The postcard from Grandma is still hung by a magnet on the fridge. One day, this house will be yours. Keep it safe. Her cursive looped steady and clean, even as her hands had started to shake near the end. I finally opened the envelope. Inside were papers, dry, formal, with stamps and typeface too official to be kind. Something about probate, estate confirmation, and a line that made my stomach turn. The estate of the late Naomi Bell, survived by Walter and Patricia Bell. My parents had told the court I was dead. No funeral, no obituary, just a quiet erasure, tucked behind bureaucracy and sealed with a notary's stamp. I read it again, slower this time, in case it changed. It didn't. I didn't cry. That part of me had burned out long ago. I just walked to the hallway closet, opened the false panel behind the winter coats, and pulled out the metal box I hadn't touched in nearly 4 years. Inside were the last pieces of me, a faded photo of me and Grandma on the front porch, my birth certificate, creased from too many moves, a utility bill with my real name on it, and a sealed envelope with, "If you ever need to come back, A.R., written in tiny, slanted handwriting. I sat on the floor and opened it. The letter inside was short. "I know who you are, and I know they lied." I folded the letter carefully. Then I bought a bus ticket to Lancaster Courthouse. Arrival, 9:12 a.m., November 15th. You don't need a coffin to vanish. Sometimes, all it takes is silence, and someone eager to write you off. 5 years ago, I vanished without anyone laying a hand on me. No funeral, no headstone, just a slow, deliberate erasure. I was 30, tired, and invisible long before I stopped being seen. It started with a car accident just outside Harrisburg. Nothing fatal, some bruises, a cracked rib. But when I reached for my phone to call someone, I hesitated. And when no one called me first, I waited longer. By the time I walked out of the hospital 2 days later, no one had asked if I was okay. I went home anyway. The house was locked. My key still turned the doorknob, but the rooms had changed. My name was gone from the mail slot. My bedroom door was shut tight, painted over. My mother stood in the hallway, not startled, just annoyed. "It's easier if you don't come back," she said. No explanation, no questions, just the kind of dismissal that makes you understand you were never really part of the plan. So I left, I got on a bus with a single bag and landed in Lancaster with no plan beyond staying unnoticed. I picked up odd jobs, bagging groceries, scrubbing windows, folding menus at the back of Sally's diner. I didn't speak unless someone spoke first. People thought I was shy. That was fine. Sitting on the bus, thinking back to my mother's cold words, remembering the scene where I was erased from my family, I realized that was no longer the place I wanted to return to, an indescribable feeling. If you sympathize with me, please leave a comment number 9 in the comment section below. Now let's get to the next development of the story. One Saturday at the farmer's market, I saw a man stumble near the apple bins. Thin, older, gray hair like ash. No one moved. I stepped forward, caught his elbow before he hit the ground, and sat with him on the curb until he could breathe again. He looked at me like I was a riddle. "Why'd you help?" "Because you looked like you needed it," I said. The next week, he left a paper bag near the booth where I sold hand pies. Inside was a scarf, navy wool stitched by hand, and a note. "If you ever need to come back, AR." We didn't speak much. Sometimes he'd walk by and nod. Once, he gave me a lemon bar wrapped in wax paper. I never told him my name, but one day, as the leaves turned that strange red-brown shade, he said, "The law forgets what it can't see. But memory's harder to bury." He slipped a card into my hand. "If you ever want your name back, I know the way." They thought the dead don't speak, but I was never good at staying silent. The courthouse in Lancaster hadn't changed much since the last time I walked past it years ago. Red brick, tall windows, the smell of old paper and worn wood wafting out every time the doors opened. But I'd never been inside. Not until that day. I arrived 10 minutes early, boots scuffed and damp from the morning mist, scarf wrapped tight. I sat in the last row, quiet, unnoticed. The room filled slowly, suits, winter coats, a reporter I vaguely recognized from the local station. At the front, my parents sat with their lawyer. Walter's silver hair looked polished. Patricia's pearls glinted under the lights. They looked comfortable, entitled, like grief was something they had already worn and put away neatly in a drawer. A clerk called the case. The estate of Naomi Bell. My name echoed through the chamber like a ghost. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Proceeding with verification of inheritance by Walter and Patricia Bell, surviving parents of the deceased." I stood. My heartbeat didn't race. It just pulsed steady and sure, like it had been waiting years for this exact moment. "Excuse me," I said. All heads turned. My parents did not. "Does anyone wish to contest this proceeding?" the judge asked. "I do." Walter's pen froze mid-signature. Patricia dropped her purse. Gasps filled the room, and a reporter stood halfway, fumbling for her notepad. I stepped forward, pulling a folder from my bag. Birth certificate, old photos, copies of letters. The notarized statement from Mr. Rowe's firm. "I am Naomi Bell," I said. "I am not dead. I never was." The silence was stunning, not in disbelief, but in recognition. Like some part of them had always known. The judge motioned for me to approach. I laid everything out. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for Walter's arm, but neither of them said a word. The judge paused, then said calmly, "This matter will require full review. The court cannot proceed with the transfer of assets today." I nodded. "I'm not here for the money. I'm here because the truth deserves a room of its own." As I walked out, someone whispered, "That's Naomi Bell." She's alive. I didn't come to destroy them. I came to reclaim myself. The courtroom was quieter the second time I entered. Maybe because they knew I wasn't a ghost. Maybe because the lie had started to unravel. Outside, the trees swayed in the wind, their bare limbs knocking gently against the windows like they wanted to listen in. I took my seat near the front this time. No need to hide, no need to brace. The hearing had been rescheduled, and the judge had requested my testimony be formally included in the record. I stood when asked, the same folder in my hand, but now I held it differently. Not like proof, but like permission. This time, my parents turned to look. Patricia's expression flickered with something like fear. Walter looked like he'd aged 5 years and 5 days. The judge invited me to speak. "I'm here," I began, "because for 5 years I have been erased. My life was paused, not by accident, but by decision. Not mine." I explained what happened after the accident, how no one called, how no one came, how I returned to a locked door and silence. I told them about living under borrowed names, the odd jobs, the quiet mornings with no record of my existence. "I don't want punishment," I said. "I want the truth. I want my name returned, my place, not in their home, but in the world." The judge nodded, taking notes. He requested a delay in the probate ruling. The burden of proof had shifted. And my parents? They said nothing, but the gallery stirred. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the cold November air. A reporter waited near the steps, but didn't push. I walked past, slowly. My scarf fluttered behind me, like a ribbon cut loose. At the corner, an older man in a cap raised 2 fingers in greeting. I nodded back. Later that afternoon, while I stood in line at Sally's diner for a slice of pie, a woman I didn't recognize leaned toward me. "Are you?" I nodded before she finished. "Welcome home," she said simply. As I stepped out, the reporter asked, "What do you want people to know?" I said, "That I never left." They just stopped looking. The house still smelled like old apples and cedar. Even after all these years, I hadn't stepped onto that porch since the week Grandma passed. The paint on the railing had peeled, and the welcome mat was curled at the corners, but the door still creaked the same way when I touched it. I didn't go in. Not yet. The place was still under review by the court, but I'd gotten a key from the clerk, just in case you'd like to see it again. I sat on the top step and let the quiet settle. Lancaster in late November carried a kind of stillness I'd forgotten, one broken only by the soft rustle of dry leaves and the distant chime from the church tower downtown. A bicycle tire crunched gravel near the sidewalk. I looked up to see a boy, maybe 10, struggling to balance a crate on his handlebars. He stopped in front of the gate. "You moving in?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "Used to live here when I was your age." The boy peered past me at the porch. "Looks haunted." "Most good things are." He grinned. "I'm Eli." I introduced myself, just as the front door of the house across the street opened, and a short, white-haired woman emerged, carrying a foil-covered dish. "Well, I'll be," she said. "I knew that porch light wouldn't stay dark forever." "Hi, Mrs. Davis," I said, surprised I remembered her name. She handed me the dish. "Baked apple crisp. Welcome back, sweetie." As Eli and I worked to untangle the porch light wires, he insisted on helping. I noticed a small sign in the bakery window across the street. It read, "Thanks, Naomi." I blinked. I hadn't spoken to anyone there since the day I left. Maybe I was more visible than I thought. A letter sat waiting inside, postmarked 2 weeks ago. From Alan Rose Estate. Some letters change your fate. Others just remind you who you've always been. The envelope was thick and cream-colored, with a return address from the Rowe estate. I sat on the porch, steam curling from a chipped mug of tea in my hand, and waited until the sun rose high enough to warm the steps before I opened it. Inside was a legal document, handwritten note, and a check. Not large, but more than kindness usually comes with. The letter was from Alan himself, dated just 3 weeks before he passed. You gave me more than oxygen that day at the market. You gave me dignity. I'm returning the favor. This house belongs to you now, legally. I had my attorney fix the paperwork. Also included is what's left of a little retirement account. You'll make better use of it than I ever did. He'd signed it simply, -A. I read it twice. Then I pressed it to my chest, letting the air slip out of me in a long, soft breath. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like being remembered. I spent the rest of the morning unpacking the few boxes I'd carried in from storage. Grandma's quilts still smelled like cedar. Her recipe cards were faded but intact, bound together with twine. I found a photo of us on the porch swing, the one I thought I'd lost. By late afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Eli stood holding a small pie, his cheeks pink from the cold. "It's from Mrs. Davis," he said. "She says you should eat it warm." I took the pie, smiling. "Want to help me hang the porch sign?" He nodded. Together, we lifted the wooden plaque back into place. The Bell Home, established, Ayrate Torlayrate Narpati. The wind picked up just a little, rattling the leaves across the sidewalk. Eli waved goodbye. I stepped back inside and stood by the front window as the light dipped toward evening. I wasn't back to reclaim anything. I stayed to grow something new. Some houses don't just hold memories. They wait for you to come home to yourself. I didn't return with anger, only with the quiet hope of being seen, truly seen, for who I was, and had always been. Kindness, even when unspoken, leaves its mark. And sometimes the ones we help in passing are the very people who help us stand again. If this story touched something in you, maybe let today be the day you offer a hand to someone who's been overlooked. It doesn't take much, just the kind of light that says, "I see you." And if stories like this give you something to carry with you, consider subscribing so you'll always have a place to return to whenever the world feels a little too loud.